Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews and to another episode of Overbooked here on the channel. This is the series where I talk about every single book on my shelves because it's the only way I can gain magical powers. Today we are talking about Rena Barron's Kingdom of Souls trilogy. Some very speedy disclaimers before we start. I had a review copy of the first book in this series. I think I won it at Yalk, perhaps. Way back when. So I've had it for a while. This time around I listened to all of them via audiobook on Everand. Regardless of where books come from, nobody's paying me to talk about books except my patrons, and all opinions are my own. I'm going to keep this as spoiler-free as humanly possible while still talking about the trilogy overall. If you do want to go in knowing absolutely nothing, pause the video, come back when you've read them, we'll talk then. And I will link the story graph for the books down below in case you want to check out any user-generated content warnings. I guess a big one for parents being terrible is probably the first one I would go for. This is a young adult book. I guess technically it is young adult. I think you can read it as adult as well, but that's by the by. Fantasy book written by author Rena Barron. They came out between 2019 and 2023. Kingdom of Souls is book 1. Here is the cover. Reaper of Souls is book 2. Here is the cover, and Master of Souls is book 3. Rena Barron has also written Maya and the Dark Rising, which is a contemporary YA. It looks kind of middle grade adjacent. It looks very interesting. It's not what I'm currently interested in reading, but it does exist. And her website says she loves all things ghosts, SFF, and superheroes. I will say, I obviously don't have a book to hold up because I have unhauled my ARC copy of the book. It was very, very different from the actual final edition of the book. I think they made the ARCs quite early in the process, and I didn't feel the need to hang on to it, so when I did my recent book unhaul, I did unhaul it, so I don't have it to wave at you, but it wasn't the right cover anyway, so that's why it's in Overbooked, even though I don't have something physical to show you. What's the plot? Ara, our main character, is born into a powerful witch doctor family, though she has no magic of her own. She has been waiting for many years for it to manifest, and yet it has not come. She has yet to try the dangerous practice of trading her years for magic, and she swears she's never going to do so. However, when children around the kingdom start going missing, she realises she might have to make immense sacrifices in order to discover what is going on. Turns out the Demon King is stirring, and Ara is going to have to sacrifice a lot to stop him. Books 1, 2, and 3 follow on directly from each other. It is one of those trilogies where we just kind of flow through an arc. We're not getting into companions, we're not getting into alternates, we are just going straight trilogy. One of the things Rena Barron talked about in an interview about writing this book is that she wanted to challenge perceptions of witch doctors and of voodoo, which typically have a very negative connotation in a lot of books for various reasons, a lot of which are racism. She wanted to write a book in a world where magic was neither explicitly good or explicitly bad, it was about what you did with it. We are in a world that is West African in inspiration, though it is a completely new fantasy world. I highly recommend going and checking out the website for the book, which has an interactive map you can click on. It does feel a little bit to me like perhaps more marketing went into this than the result that it pulled. I don't hear a lot of people talking about this series. Maybe that's just me, maybe that's my part of the internet. But yes, there is a very cool interactive map. You can find out all about these lands, about the tribes, about the tribal lands. Very cool. A lot of mythology, lot of lore, a lot of history, and where history and mythology intertwine. It is a very rich fantasy world, again with that West African inspiration. I particularly enjoyed the exploration of magic, again that connection into trying to subvert typical perceptions of these things. I thought it was very cool that all the different kinds of magic that could happen and the different ways in which magic happened, and I thought that way of playing out bad magic and good magic and everything in between was really interesting. The plot of the overall series, I've talked a little bit about Ara and the Demon King and that kind of conflict that goes on. I can't talk much more about it without getting into some major plot spoilers, which is really difficult because there are a lot of spoilers in book 1, so know that I'm talking around this a little bit. It is a very good plot. It is a plot that escalates across the 3 books rather than going totally out of the window, which is, I think, a huge success. There was a trend in the last few years of the 3rd book in a trilogy just going completely wild, just leaving you going, where on earth am I, what's happening, and especially throwing in huge plot reveals or world building reveals in the 3rd book that just felt totally disconnected from book 1. This feels like it's a plot and a threat and stakes that escalate rather than just veering off into another direction. I think that really works. It obviously does have the disadvantage of the 3 books kind of blend together a little bit as you go, but overall I'd rather have that than suddenly everything going completely wild in book 3. This is a young adult series, which actually surprised me when I realised it was marketed as young adult, because to me it felt like an adult series just with very young protagonists. I think seeing it through that lens and seeing it through a young adult filter, I can see why that is. There are some very young adult tropes in this, including just incredibly sacrificial characters. We have love triangle adjacent things, if you like that features in this, and a lot of power and importance being given to one young woman. As somebody who has moved away from reading young adult and who has made a lot of reviews, especially recently, that have kind of amounted to, if you like YA, you'll like this, but I don't really like YA anymore, this didn't feel that kind of cliched YA to me, at least. And that might be because I did it via audiobook, and that might just be the mood I was in. But to me, I think you could read it as adult or YA, but it does have some fun YA tropes in it. I really like the character connections across this series. I've mentioned that love triangle romance thing. Not my favourite thing ever, but it works well within this story and there's a lot of reasoning behind it. Likewise, I think a lot of the friendships and familial relationships are fascinating. There's some really interesting villains across the series. Just overall, character-wise, it's a very, very strong series. Ara as a main character did sometimes annoy me. A lot of the characters did sometimes annoy me, but I was very much annoyed at the character and not at the writing of the character, which to me are 2 different things. If you are planning on picking this up, I highly recommend you pick up the audiobooks rather than physically. I found it immensely dense physically, but the audio flowed much better. I like the audiobook narrator. I think they do a good job. It helped cement the various different points of view characters for me. It made everything feel a little bit more enjoyable and understandable. Obviously took me a lot longer to read because of that reason, but overall that's my recommendation. Do the audiobook, don't read them physically. I already mentioned that now that I'm on the other side of it, I find it quite hard to distinguish what happened in all 3 books. I think book 1 is fairly distinct. Book 2 and 3 kind of meld together a little bit. I think possibly on a reread I might feel different, or maybe if I did them via different formats. But overall, just something to note, they do feel a bit homogenous once you've read all of them. I've written in my last con, talk to one another, but also maybe that's the point. I just got frustrated at characters who most of their problems could have been solved by them having a conversation, but I do think it was intentional to make them not have the conversation. They weren't just being annoying for... Well, they were being annoying for the plot's sake, but also it made sense for their characters as well. I know sometimes for me, I can't cope with a book where characters just don't talk to each other. In this, enough conversations were had that I wasn't too bothered by it. In terms of other things you might want to read, obviously there is other West African inspired fantasy out there. One of the big ones that gets tossed around a lot is Children of Blood and Bone, but obviously that series is currently incomplete as far as I'm aware. I have read the first 2 and I like them. I personally feel like when the 3rd book does eventually come out, it's going to be wild, so I don't know about that one. If you haven't read any Nnedi Okorafor before, I highly recommend her stuff. I liked the Binti series, which is her series of novellas. I did like the Nasibidi Scripts series, however I don't think it's her strongest work. I've really enjoyed her more recent novellas, so things like Remote Control. I'm also currently in the midst of a reread / trying to finish off Roseanne A. Brown's A Song of Wraiths and Ruin series, which feels in some ways very similar to this. I'll let you know when I've finished it. Should you read the Kingdom of Souls series? I was pleasantly surprised by how much I liked this and how glad I was to have finished it. I thought that I was going to get very bogged down in book 2. I think probably because of the audiobook that didn't happen. I think it's a very solid older YA fantasy trilogy, and there aren't that many of those around, so I would recommend it if the plot is tickling your fancy. Have you read this? Have you read any of the books? Is this a series you're hoping to finish? Let me know down in the comments below. While you're commenting, if you haven't already, please do subscribe. It makes me feel loved and appreciated. You can also come hang out on Discord, where we have chill chats about books. I'd like to say an enormous thank you to all the ghosts who haunt me over on Patreon. They support the channel and in return get early access to videos, bonus content, live streams, and more. If you'd like to join their number, that's linked below as well. Thank you so much to you for watching. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. There's gonna be some bloopers now. It's so echoey in here today, I'm really sorry. Rena Barron has also written Maya and the Dark Souls Rising. Is that right? Dark Rising, not Dark Souls, that's a different thing. You can also follow me on social media. No, you can't. You can't follow me on social media anymore. When will I learn?